I've asked people about that, and you know, I have yet to find anybody who's an American who even remembers having a Flag Day.
Mhm.
You know, they're so big on the flag and patriotism, but they don't even remember Flag Day.
Maybe it's the Mandela effect,
It could
and
be.
maybe you're remembering it differently, and it didn't ever happen.
Well, I've
No, it
had,
was very common. Even I was aware of the US's sort of Flag Day approach.
Mhm.
And don't you still do that? I know when it comes to college and university sports, it's an entire business in itself. Don't you still sort of, aren't you still overly patriotic when it comes to those sporting events?
Well, sports is actually always been. Oh, they've always tied it to patriotism,
Hmm.
like baseball especially. Now baseball, they just think baseball is all American and apple pie, and then we've already talked about the apple pie thing. You like to point that out, like we were the ones who came out with apple pie first, you know. So yeah, it's apple
Let's get
pie,
this apple pie here.
apple pie and baseball. That's the two things that they are really really patriotic over. Football is
Well, the thing
becoming more
is that
popular. Go ahead. I'm sorry about them.
sports was never about being friendly.
Mm-mm.
Sports was only ever about competition. I mean, what creatures on earth like keep fit in order to kill each other?
Mm-hmm.
We're the only ones that do it. And it's really good, I think, that we learned to calm that aggressive spirit and channel it into competition instead of into a death wish.
What it was. I mean, I think me and you actually had this conversation before, didn't we, Bob Dub, about like the gladiators
Mm.
and like
I know we talked about so many things. I don't remember all of them.
Even the 20th century, sport was used as a real propaganda tool. I mean, I'm thinking of what the Soviets used sports as a massive propaganda. The Nazis did.
Mm.
What was it? The 1937 Olympics.
yeah, what
Because
was
it's a threat. It's a threat.
Mhm.
Look how strong our men are. Are your men as strong as our men? It's like showing off the troops,
Mm.
but without that layer of it being the actual military.
Yeah.
This is our
Well,
fighting
you've also got the European tradition that goes back to the Greeks. These athletic contests, they were sort of a replacement for warfare. And the early Olympic Games, many of the games had to do with basically war games. Like they would have a race where you wore bronze greaves, or wore a helmet, these heavy bronze helmets or shield, and had to run a race that way, just as you might on a battlefield. It was all about throwing discuses, which were weapons. The ancient Indians had them too, the chakras, and all of these things were reflections of warfare. So yeah, as Bob says, it was a way of demonstrating that we could beat you on the battlefield, and here we are beating you on the athletic field. And of course, their highest award was a simple crown of olive, which is reminds me of an anecdote when the Persians were invading Greece, and he had some Greek advisors, and he said, "Why do they stop all their wars and have this big sacred festival? It's like this is the most important thing, and the victor of the Olympics, it's the Olympic Games, and instituted by the gods, and the winner is the greatest man in Greece. And what is his reward for doing all this? Like a wreath of olive." And he's like, how can we conquer people with all of our wealth that have no more regard for wealth and all this power than just a simple wreath of olive? I think it was like a noble savage kind of a comment. But hello, everyone.
Aye.
Okay. It's
And Silent Roger.
a good thing to. It's a good thing to interact at that level with that amount of restraint and dignity and forethought. Because to do things like making the prize for being the strongest, most aggressive man, making his prize a laurel wreath, is like you you don't need to fight to keep the peace. There's a better way that we can be than having to kill each other over resources. If we could distribute the resources in a better way and use our everything that we've done instead of to compete with each other, to cooperate with each other. I don't know. I just think that's you would be able to bring up wonderful children in that environment. You know, you'd just be able to build a different type of future with an attitude like that.
Not sure. I would argue that a form of national pride, I could say civic pride there, but national pride is a good thing in itself. Granted, it can be used.
Well, you can, and I'm thinking what Bob said about cooperation as opposed to, conflict. And, things, when we look at our history, when we look at our planet, the way we live on it, it's very complicated. And there are moments of conflict and there are moments of cooperation. And they're driven by what seem to be various factors. But I think at the end of the day, cooperation is the better evolutionary strategy. But at the same time, that cooperation can be used for like a larger conflict. That would be what Mark was talking about, the national level of things, because of the competition for resources, which and Bob talked about, distribution. A lot of it these days isn't so much a lack of resources as a lack of an infrastructure and a logical way to distribute them. And Terry Pratchett wrote that great book, one of his Discworld novels, and they were talking about one of his characters who was deaf, who was very literal minded. And the question was like, how would you end hunger? It's like, well, I don't know. I'd look at the different socioeconomic factors and try to figure out a way to, create sustainable agriculture. I said, no, not him. He would just give everybody a meal. And that would fix things in the short term. But, a lot of the issues we have are simply short-term thinking, I think. Allocation of resources is more than just handing people stuff. It's giving them wealth, which means that they'll be able to create their own resources and have control over their own lives. But it does, on the other hand, there is that control. It's like hydraulic despotism, one of the favorite things that I like to point out. If you're controlling the flow of food or oil or water or whatever the substances that people need, you get to dictate their behavior. So you have these two opposing things in kind of a struggle, an agon, as the Greeks would say. We have this urge to cooperate, and I think it's intrinsic to us. It's very natural for us to cooperate. That's the first thing we learn. The basic unit of society is your family, and the first thing you learn in the family is cooperation, or at least it ought to be. So I think cooperation is a natural default for us. But there's a lot of ideas about how this became less important. I was talking to Bob not long ago about a guy named James DeMeo, who he's a Reichian psychologist, and I don't accept everything that Reich wrote, but he had some interesting ideas, and he talked about how not just individuals, but an entire society can become mentally ill. And I won't go into the details of DeMeo's thesis. If anyone's interested, he wrote a book called Saharasia, but the idea is basically that our modern penchant for warfare and fatality is, killing people is a recent thing in our history, relatively speaking, and that it is a form of societal mental illness, which of course implies that it might be cured one day. We can but hope.
Well, I think that the basis for war is fear. And I think that we learned to love and be kind about 2,000 years ago. But when you learn that, you also learn vulnerability. Before that, you're really hard. When you don't allow yourself to love, you're really hard. And you can get on with all the hardships. But when you relax and you allow your heart to soften, and you are able to give people more of yourself, you also allow yourself to fear things more. And when you fear things more, you can start making irrational decisions. And when we were, as the warfaring species that we were afraid because we didn't know how to control things well enough to make sure that we could ensure our survival on Earth. One bad crop and we were wiped out, and we didn't make it through the winter. And that was our whole family, our whole clan, So I think now that we live in this age where we have this ability to talk to each other and not be talked at via the television, but for us to initiate these conversations and talk to each other, I think that we're learning not to be afraid of each other, and that these people over there think this and those people think that is not true. We're all the same person thinking the same thing with the same issues and the same agon you said earlier, Otto.
Yeah, a struggle, the same. Yeah.
Mark, let's let you have a turn to answer, because we often talk over you.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking of your point. I'm not sure if I fully agree. Each country, each sort of area has its own problems. I mean,
Just so you guys know too, I have cheeseburgers or hamburgers in front of me, so I'm going to be eating, and I don't want to make weird crunchy sounds.
Very good.
But I am listening. Okay.
I don't know. I'll have to think about that one a bit further. Yeah.
Well, I think I see what Mark is cogitating about, because we're speaking on a very grand level, if you like. And one of my favorite things, and I'm sure I've said it before, sometimes it's useful to look at an idea philosophically, theoretically, and practically. And if something is philosophically valid and compelling, when we start looking at it theoretically, we can see some of the problems that it might entail. And then when we try to practically apply it, usually we have all sorts of issues that we simply hadn't foreseen or thought about. It's very easy, especially when you're very focused on something, to not take into account all of the repercussions. So any kind of change, if the change is going to be comfortable, and that's difficult to do, comfortable change, it's almost a contradiction. It has to be a gradual process, I think, in certain ways. But I think this gradual process, suddenly it can become very sudden. And when we look at other changes in our society, Professor Dutton says we have become kinder as we have gained an IQ over the years, as our species has, got a larger brain and so forth. And I mean, not everywhere, not uniformly.